Hi everyone, my name is Rich Chien with the Department of the Environment, and I'm going to be giving you a quick overview of the Climate Action Plan, how it's structured, the different sectors we're tackling, and how we're trying to incorporate equity into our planning process. To get us started, let's do a quick pop quiz. Which of the four areas listed below is the largest source of climate pollution in San Francisco? Perhaps not surprisingly, the transportation sector is our largest source of emissions, comprising 45% of the city's total, mainly from the use of private cars and trucks. And as you can see from the chart, that is followed closely by the building sector at 44%, the large majority of emissions coming from burning natural gas for space heating and water heating in our buildings. Note that this reflects the 2018 sector-based or conventional greenhouse gas inventory, which SF Environment has been doing on behalf of the city every year over the past 14 years. This data serves as the foundation for how we approach climate action in San Francisco. The last Climate Action Plan update was issued back in 2013, and a lot has changed since then, including technology advancements, increased public interest and awareness, a lot of very supportive state policies, and now, thankfully, a new federal administration and a Congress that can throw some serious support behind our local efforts. We feel it's more important than ever to show local leadership and to protect our communities from the worst impacts of climate change. So we aim to create a plan with detailed strategies that focus on impactful near and long-term actions that have a viable path to implementation. One new thing we're introducing in this plan is an alternative way to view how we generate greenhouse gas emissions by accounting for and addressing sources that are currently not included in the conventional sector-based inventory. This chart shows emissions as seen through the consumption-based emissions inventory, which essentially accounts for emissions generated by the production and consumption of goods and services, regardless of where the emissions are sent into the atmosphere. Over the last couple of years, we have worked closely with scientists at Lawrence Berkeley Labs to assemble and analyze this new data, which now informs the responsible production and consumption sector of the draft plan, which I will go over later. Here we see data that shows San Francisco has successfully decreased emissions citywide 35% below 1990 levels, while greatly increasing economic output, dispelling the false talking point that climate action is at odds with the economy. That said, we all know that over the past couple of decades, growing income inequality and skyrocketing housing costs have forced many low to middle income families, and in particular, communities of color, to be displaced out of the city or worse. On top of that, the local economy has plunged recently due to COVID and still faces significant challenges, especially for all of our local small businesses. One of this plan's guiding principles is to advance racial and social equity and economic recovery for all while striving to meet our ambitious emission reduction goals. The image on the left here shows the city's established climate action framework 0, 80, 100 routes, where 0 stands for zero waste to landfill and incineration, 80 stands for achieving 80% sustainable trips by 2030, meaning trips taken by transit, walking, and biking instead of driving. 100 stands for 100% renewable electricity by 2030 and a complete phase out of fossil fuels by 2050. And roots means sequestering carbon from the atmosphere using natural systems. Below that are the goals of this climate action plan: to chart a path to reach net zero emissions citywide by 2050, and to advance racial and social equity and ensure opportunities and benefits of climate action are available to everyone. Following the data from our greenhouse gas inventory work, we've divided the plan into 6 distinct but often overlapping sectors, which are energy supply, transportation and land use, housing, building operations, responsible production and consumption, and healthy ecosystems, for which each sector we have specific goals to help achieve our vision. The city is now seeking your input on the draft strategies and actions, which represent over a year and a half of collaboration involving key city departments and working groups comprised of a mix of community leaders, businesses, and technical experts. I'll add here that the plan is not starting from scratch, but is really just another step on our journey. It's a big one, but one that builds on 20 plus years of sustainability policy and program experience, data and science, best practices, and leveraging emerging opportunities to advance this work. That said, with our ambitious 2050 goals and our need to advance racial equity, it's clear we must do much more. As just mentioned, climate solutions need to address racial and social equity, as well as health, just transition and economic recovery, and resilience. To guide our work, we created a racial and social equity assessment tool to evaluate all of our draft climate actions through these 4 lenses. The tool considers the root causes of disparities created by racial inequity, and it helped to shape strategies to reduce or eliminate disparities and improve the equitable distribution of benefits. Next, climate change and its causes have wide-ranging health impacts, especially to our most vulnerable residents, so actions have been crafted to reduce these effects. A just transition and economic recovery expands opportunities to all San Franciscans for meaningful work. We want to make sure both our transition to a low-carbon economy and our economic recovery creates pathways to jobs that support our communities. Finally, we need to make sure our climate actions also support the city's adaptation and resilience goals. The ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to hazards of all types will help us cope with these risks, including the impacts of climate change. Now I'm going to go quickly over each of the sectors in a little more detail. First, we have the energy supply sector with goals of supplying 100% renewable electricity by 2030 and completely phasing out of fossil fuels by 2050. This is critical to support decarbonization of our 2 biggest sectors, transportation and buildings, while reducing climate pollution from burning fossil fuels for energy. Examples of strategies include providing 100% greenhouse gas-free electricity at affordable rates, investing in local renewable energy projects with support for local employment, and planning to eventually get off of the city's natural gas system. Next is building operations, with goals to require all new construction to be zero emissions by 2030. And I'll add, this has already been completed with the passage of the all-electric new construction ordinance last year. But next, we'll be turning our focus to the complex challenge of phasing out natural gas from our existing buildings by making them efficient and all-electric, powered by 100% renewable electricity. Example strategies include tailoring approaches by specific building ownership and system types, coming up with a system to measure progress against this goal, and putting in place protections for renters and low-income residents to prevent displacement. Next is the transportation and land use sector, with goals to achieve 80% of trips by sustainable modes, such as transit, walking, and biking, and electrifying the remaining cars and vehicles that are still on the road. Example strategies include efforts to improve local transit system speed and reliability, and enhancing integrations with regional transit, making significant new investments in key transit corridors throughout the city, and adding active transportation infrastructure like bike lanes, and supporting EV adoption. Next is housing, which is an entirely new sector we're addressing in the Climate Action Plan. The draft housing strategies are rooted in equity and recognize the role the city plays to reverse displacement and ensure people have access to quality housing and jobs within the city, which reduces regional transportation emissions and congestion and makes our city more vibrant and resilient. The housing goals are to add at least 5,000 new housing units per year, at 30% of them being deemed affordable. Strategies focus on ensuring housing and job opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, and supporting low and middle income families through new zoning and targeted funding assistance. As mentioned earlier, the responsible production and consumption sector expands how we think about zero waste to include new categories of goods and services that have been traditionally left out of the greenhouse gas inventory. Sector goals are to reduce the generation of solid waste, so going beyond dealing with discards after their use, but going upstream to reduce the overall amount that is being generated, and getting at other sources of emissions not currently accounted for, like air travel. Examples of strategies include focusing on the embodied carbon of construction materials, promoting the reuse and repair economy, and raising awareness and action to reduce the carbon footprint of the food system. The sixth sector is healthy ecosystems, which focuses on using nature-based solutions like vegetation and soils to sequester carbon from the atmosphere we can't directly eliminate. Healthy ecosystems also support biodiversity and provide many community benefits to residents. Examples of strategies focus on strengthening partnerships between city and non-city agencies to advance healthy ecosystems, maximizing urban trees and greening, restoring parks and natural areas, and piloting the use of organics that we already collect to improve the ability of soil to sequester carbon. This slide shows how the Climate Action Plan is being coordinated with other related city plans. The Hazards and Climate Resilience Plan identifies hazards and their associated vulnerabilities and consequences and presents nearly 100 strategies to reduce risks, mitigate impacts, and adapt to unavoidable climate impacts. Very important to the transportation sector are Connect SF and congestion pricing, representing two major transportation planning efforts to re-envision the system in San Francisco and to advance efficiency, equity, and livability. And finally, the Planning Department is initiating updates to key elements of the general plan, including updates to the community safety, transportation, and housing elements, and incorporating a new environmental justice framework across all of the plans. Finally, this last slide shows some key milestones within our current timeline. We are aiming to finalize the plan over the next few months, which include documenting emissions reductions and other key impacts from actions, and integrating recommendations from the racial and social equity assessment. But most importantly, it won't be done until we have completed the public engagement process and we have addressed all of your feedback. Thank you for your time and interest, and please visit sfenvironment.org/climateplan to learn more.